We live on the Earth, don't we? It's all around us and you see it from space. Yeah, but what are we seeing? See, this is an area of research to understand the human situation that is ignored by almost everybody. You will see the research, I do it myself, and it needs doing, into political manipulation, financial manipulation, manipulation of wars, engineered terrorist attacks, and all that. And that needs to be done. But the bottom line, surely, is to understand the very reality that we're experiencing. What we call life, what we call the world. What is it? It seems, on the face of it, to be very simple. It's a planet, it's a universe, and it's solid and stuff. It's all matter. But when you go deeper into it, actually not very deep, really, to start with, none of that is true. We don't live in a solid world. Quantum physics has shown that for a long time. We live in an illusory world that appears to be physical, but isn't. And we are experiencing the vastly advanced version of a video game, a simulation. And when you look at how people play video games, these virtual reality video games, I mean, what is happening? People put goggles on. They put headsets and earphones on. And they, often put gloves on. And what that is doing is simply hijacking, hacking into the way that we are decoding reality all the time. Because what is happening is that waveform information is being turned into electrical information by the five senses and then communicated to the brain. And the brain then decodes that. In fact, the whole genetic structure is involved, but the brain decodes that into the reality we think we're experiencing. This is what's happening. This simulation that I've been talking about for so long in the books is like a Wi-Fi situation. If you are in a place that has Wi-Fi, you can't see it, but it's in the atmosphere all around you, in the unseen. And the computer then decodes that information field into what we see on the screen. You talk about the internet. Well, you say the internet is graphics and pictures and moving pictures and words. Well, yes, but only on the screen. Everywhere else, it's just in the form of encoded information. And so what we're doing through what I call the biological computer is receiving and transmitting information, interacting with this field, what I call the cosmic internet. Think of it like a cosmic Wi-Fi field. And as we do so, we appear to be in a world, but we're actually only decoding it. Just like the computer decodes information from the tower onto the screen. in a very different form. So what video games are doing, virtual reality video games are doing, is hacking into that process. Through the gloves, they are hacking into the feeling sense. From, of course, sight and sound, they're hacking into those 5 sense decoding processes of the body. And what they're doing is feeding them other information to override what they would normally be decoding in the world that we call real, bizarrely, really. And so suddenly, people can be taken, and they're getting more and more sophisticated now, these virtual reality games, into a world that is being decoded as if it's real. You'll see people reacting and stuff with the headsets on to nothing more than information being fed to their senses for them to decode into a fake reality. Well, here's a question. What if that's what we were doing? Decoding a fake reality? Which comes back to my question about, is the Earth flat? Is there an Earth? How would we know? How does the computer know what's real on its screen? How do we know? We're experiencing this reality which appears to be so solid but isn't. Well, there's a fake for a start. And we decode into a sense of reality whatever's in the information field, just as the computer does. You change the information, you change what's on the screen. And so, if we live in the equivalent of a computer simulation, and I strongly suggest we do, and indeed there are science projects, mainstream, well, open-minded mainstream studies around the world now into that question. Is this a simulation? Is this like a video game? As you know, some physicists have pointed out, the physics of our reality is the same basically as the physics of a computer game. And so the evidence is moving towards that all the time. So here's a question. He who controls the simulation controls the information that we're decoding, controls the sense of reality of who we are, where we are, and what the heck's going on. So, press enter. Oh, the Earth is round, mate. Look, I mean, you see it from space. Press enter. Well, look, everyone knows the Earth's flat. Look at it, you can see it from space. It is that simple. And it's only when we get into these deep questions about reality itself and the actual world that we're living in, or decoding to believe we live in. These are where the answers lie, because this is where the rabbit hole eventually leads. So these questions, these certainties that people have, so that when people like me come and question the certainties, oh, you're mad, everyone knows that. Well, how do you know that? Well, I told it at school, yeah? And where else? Well, tell it, the media say so, yeah? Scientists say so, yeah? Ever thought that that information that you're getting from all these people was coming from the same source? Indeed, from the same hoax. People who, in these various professions, say this is how it is, are caught in the hoax, are caught in the fake reality like everybody else. Most of them genuinely believe what they say because to them it's real. But when you start to look at reality in a deeper way with an open mind, when you start to see the process of how we decode reality and experience reality, then these big questions start to demand answers. What is this place? Is this world that we are decoding real? Or is it click, click, enter? And if so, who is doing the click, click, enter? I mean, years ago, bloody lot of years ago now, in the 1950s, the London Planetarium opened. And I was living in Leicester. I was born in Leicester in the English Midlands. And we never had any money. We lived from week to week. But one day, like, what? My father came down on one of these bank holidays. Came down the stairs and he announced that we were going to London. What? This would have been about late 50s. So I'd have been 6, 7. And so it was great. Went on a steam train, loved it. Gets to London, never been to London before. And my father announces we're going to the London Planetarium. I didn't even know what it was. And my father had absolutely no interest in astronomy, never mentioned it, never talked about it, but now we're going to the London Planetarium. And where I'm going with this is this. I went in the middle of the day, little kid, sat down, lights went off, and suddenly the night sky was above me, looking to me every bit like the night sky. And something struck me that day. He was a little kid. And I've always kept this in my mind ever since. Is this real or is this just a movie, basically? And talking of the night sky, we look and we see these stars, and they're thousands, millions, billions of light years, all these fantastic distances that they talk about away from us. And yet, they only exist in the form that we appear to see them when the brain, a few cubic centimeters of the brain, decode that information into the perceived reality. Over the years, there's been 2 movies that have mirrored my own research in such a way that I was taken aback when I watched them and saw these visual representations of what I've been writing about for a long time. One was, of course, The Matrix and the Matrix trilogy in general, where people were living a false reality, believing it to be real. And as a result of that, they were controlled and herded and manipulated and directed by that which was controlling the false reality. That, I suggest, as I go into detail in my books and in the Wembley event, and the video of that's going to be available very soon. I go into detail about the fact that I'm saying that that is precisely the theme of our reality and why our reality is as it is. But the other film that goes back further came out in 1988, which really captures the themes of what I'm talking about and what I'm suggesting is going on here, was one that was nothing like as big as The Matrix and as promoted as The Matrix, but it was brilliantly accurate in the way it portrayed the society that it did. And it was called They Live. And I'll talk a bit more about the storyline in a second, but basically it's the fact that a non-human race was controlling human society by hiding behind human form. And a bit like the theme of the Avatar movie, where the American military were infiltrating the society of the Na'vi, the blue people, by taking on a blue person outside form. And therefore, people are being infiltrated without realizing that some force that's not from them is doing the infiltrating. So it was kind of interesting to me this week when someone sent me a clip of an interview, in fact, the whole interview, but there was a certain clip in it that I'm talking about, by Roddy Piper. Roddy Piper was the actor who starred in They Live. And in this interview, he said, in effect, that They Live was not a film. It was like a documentary. It was like telling the story as it really is. And mentioned that I, in many ways, used that movie as a theme template for explaining what I'm saying is going on. And then actually, Roddy Piper was saying, well, that is what's going on. And I remember when I first saw They Live, and the producer, director that did everything to make it possible guy was a fellow called John Carpenter. And when I watched it, I thought, either that guy's got real lucky or he has a very good idea what's going on. I suspect the latter. And I remember someone years later wrote to John Carpenter and said, look, this bloke David Icke is saying that actually They Live is based on fact. And he said, oh, no, the aliens in the movie hiding behind human form were symbolic of the Republican Party. Well, anyone who's seen They Live, you are in a laugh. So I think when you watch John Carpenter's filmmaking history, that guy's got a very good idea of much of what's happening. That's my view anyway. So They Live, and there are so many movies coming out now that are symbolizing the society that the global cabal want to introduce. It's kind of preparing people to accept it, getting people familiar with it, so we won't resist it as much as we would otherwise. But They Live, The Matrix 2, but They Live is operating at another level. It's symbolizing the very force that is actually behind all this, and why human society is the nonsense, the inversion, the grotesque inversion of how human society could be. And the movie starts out, it came out in 1988, but it was kind of projected forward a bit. So really about now, this kind of time, it took place in. And there was a massive recession. By the way, I've put a link with this video cast so you can watch the whole film. There was a massive recession, and Roddy Piper's character is a drifter going from place to place trying to get work in the building trade. And he turns up in this particular place, and he gets a temporary job on this building site. And what happened then is he was befriended by a fella called Frank, who had nothing but said, you know, we're basically sleeping rough on this wasteland, and so you can come and join me, stay with us, because Piper just turned up, had nowhere to live, had no money. So they go to this piece of wasteland, and there's like a community there, all people struggling, can't afford homes. And what interested Roddy Piper's character is that they had this television, black and white television rigged up, really old and battered. And when they were watching this television, it kept the main programming that kept being cut in or cut out by a broadcast, a very primitive broadcast from just a face on the screen saying they're here and they're manipulating us and all that. And he started to notice that there was something strange going on at the church across the road from this piece of waste ground. And anyway, one day he goes in there, sneaks in there, and there's a choir singing. But when he gets in, he realizes it's a tape, and that there was something else going on, and it certainly wasn't anything to do with the church. Anyway, he finds some boxes, some brown boxes, and he didn't know what was in them. But that night, he was at the waste ground when the police state turned up, because as well as this massive recession that was portrayed, was also the police state, the vicious police state, the very police state that we're so fast going into now. And there was a police raid. The black helicopters, the police cars, the trucks to raise the little settlement and destroy it. And everyone, ran away. Some people got beat up, and the Roddy Piper character got away. And he came back the next day, and he went in the church because he had a look around. He wanted to know what was in these boxes. So he grabs one and runs out and goes into a back alley and opens the box. And in it were just a pile of sunglasses, which is like, what? Obviously no idea. Well, sunglasses? Well, what boxes of sunglasses got to do with anything? Anyway, he picks one up, puts it in his pocket, and then throws the rest in the trash and walks off out of the back alley into the main street. He's then walking along, and he just puts the sunglasses on. And suddenly, life weren't the same anymore, because what he could see with the sunglasses on was not what he could see with them off. And he looked around, and instead of drink Coca-Cola or vacation in Jamaica, these big adverts, boards, he saw things like stay asleep, go to sleep, obey, don't challenge authority, that kind of stuff everywhere. We was just being hit by him. Then he walks along to this newsstand, and he picks up things like kind of magazines like Newsweek and that time, that kind of thing. And he opens them up, and without the glasses on, it's just print and pictures, normal thing he used to. Puts the glasses on, and it's all the same stuff. This is your God, and it was money, and all the subliminal messages saying obey authority, go to sleep, basically just breed, and don't think for yourself, all these things in the magazines. He then looks up, and a fella comes across to buy a paper or something, and in the glasses, or through the glasses, this guy's not human. So he takes the glasses off, and the guy's human. Puts them back on, he's not human. The guy selling him the paper, he's human with the glasses and without the glasses, but not this fella. And he starts to realize as he walks around with these glasses on, and there's some really funny lines in it too, that they're the minority, but there is this group of people that are not human when you put the glasses on. And he then starts to realize, because he's in a shop and he looks up, and I think the president or somebody like that was making, I think it was the president was making a speech, and he puts the glasses on, and the president's not human. And he starts to realize that people in the positions of power, in locally and nationally, were actually these not human people. And he comes across some police, and some of them were human, but the most aggressive, unpleasant ones, they weren't human. He's now realizing what the game is. He gets back to Frank, and Frank's still working. He's working away. He's trying to earn some money to send back to his family and all that stuff. And Frank don't really want to know what Roddy Piper's character is telling him. And so they go into this back alley where he gets the sunglasses back that he threw away. And they have this fight, which at the time was one of the longest fights in movie history. It went on and on and on as they knocked the living crap out of each other. Why? Because Roddy Piper is trying to get Frank to put the glasses on so he can see the world as it really is. And Frank is fighting not to have the glasses on. Now, the fact that that was, such a long and vicious fight is incredibly symbolic of the way that humanity in general fights and kicks and custs not to know the truth. Change the subject. Don't want to know. Don't change the subject. Don't want to hear about it. Don't tell me the truth. Don't show me the truth, because I don't want to see it, because I'd rather stay in my manipulated head in the sand ignorance. But as I've said many times, ignorance is bliss, but only for a while. And then it knocks on your door and asks for your papers. We've got to face this. So there's this massive fight where Frank is trying not to put the glasses on and see the world as it really is, and etc. But eventually he does. And, whoa, he sees the world as it really is. And what they found in this They Live movie is that there was a frequency being broadcast from the top of a television television station skyscraper, which was stopping humans seeing the truth, seeing who they were really controlled by, and seeing all the subliminals that were constantly telling them to stay asleep, obey authority, not question. And eventually the broadcast dish is destroyed and it stops working. And at that moment, it's actually quite funny, really. I mean, you've got people in a bar who all look human, having a drink, and then suddenly the transmission's cut off, and there's this guy who's not human suddenly sitting among them, who was human a few seconds ago, or appeared to be. And they show many instances of suddenly people think they're with a human, and suddenly they realize they're not, because the blocking frequency to stop them from seeing it had disappeared. When you put that story together, the themes of the story, you're looking at what's in my books in detail, and the things like the Wembley event where I explained how all this fits together. Because where I've been coming from is that there is a blocking frequency that is keeping us from seeing much further into the field of reality. And thus we are entrapped within a frequency band so tiny that we can actually visually decode into a reality we think we see. It's almost funny. Of the mass matter that mainstream science says exists in this universe, it's actually a lot more, but what they say exists. The visible light, which is the only frequency band that we can see and visually experience, is so tiny it's ridiculous. The electromagnetic spectrum as a whole is only 0.005% of what they say exists in mass and matter in this universe. And visible light is a fraction of the 0.005%. So when I kind of realized that, when I saw that, when I read all that, what struck me immediately is that is freaking ridiculous. Why can we see only a ludicrously tiny band of reality? And I suggest it's because we are being held in there by transmissions that are blocking not only our ability to see further into the field of reality, but to raise our frequencies to go deeper and deeper and deeper into other levels of reality. And so that blocking frequency is one part of it. But I say there's another part of it, and that is that these transmissions are also transmitting a fake reality, which we are decoding in the way that I describe in detail in the books, into this reality we think is real, but it's actually fake. It's actually like a hack. And so when I look at it, if you fuse they live with the Matrix, you fuse those two themes together, you have pretty much got the situation that we're in. And when I talk about bloodlines, hybrid bloodlines, which can be traced way back into the ancient world, and the whole theme of royalty and special bloodlines and the bloodlines of the gods and all that stuff, all comes from this fact that they are hybrid bloodlines, part human, part non-human. And the non-human hides behind the outward human appearance, exactly as is portrayed in They Live. And so we, within our frequency band of decoding, this tiny band of frequency, visible light, we are decoding the human part of that hybrid energy field. And we see humans. Just like in They Live, they saw humans when they didn't have these sunglasses on, which broke the code. And so we think these people are human. We think royal families are human. We think people running the banking system and corporations and Monsanto and all these things, we think they're human when we look at them because they look human. But if you could see beyond the suppressed frequency band, you would see that they absolutely are not human when you get into that level of them. And so They Live is so accurate in its themes. It's stunning, really. And when you therefore look at these bloodlines that are running Britain and France and the United States and Canada and Australia and China and Russia and all these things, at the human level, that where we interact with everything, they seem to be often in opposition, like, oh, it's the Russians, it's the Chinese, it's the this, it's the that, it's the other, it's the North Koreans and so on. And at that level, it's a game being played out, basically, with the human target population thinking that all these different groups and countries and peoples are opposing each other. But actually, they're all the same non-human network, taking different forms and controlling different aspects of human society. So in that way, the Chinese leadership, if you go deep enough into their secret society network, because of course this is very compartmentalized in terms of people who know, you go into the same situation in Russia and the United States, Britain, etc. You go deep enough into the Nazis, deep enough into Stalinist, communist Russia and the Soviet Union, and all these people that appeared to be, or forces and countries that seem to be in conflict with each other, are all part of the same team. That's how it works. And so they're moving pieces around the chessboard while controlling the moves of both sides. Thus they control the game. And we have to be persuaded that actually that chessboard has multiple sides, when actually it has one, if you go deep enough. And there was another couple of stories this week which broke, science stories. One, which all kind of relate to this, and the reality we're actually experiencing. This one says X-Men mind control becomes a reality. Man plays video game using the hand of another gamer sat half a mile away. Taking control of another person's body with your mind is something that has long been dreamed of in comic books and films like X-Men, but now scientists have achieved it in real life. Researchers used electromagnets and computers to transmit a person's brainwaves, allowing them to control the hand of another sitting in a different building 1 mile away. The technology recorded the brain signals from a computer gamer and then fired them into the brain of another volunteer, triggering the nerves that controlled their hand muscles. That allowed the gamer, who had no physical control themselves, or computer controls themselves, allowed them to use the other person to play the computer game. And it says the technology makes it possible to control the body of another person with thoughts, something that Professor Xavier was able to do in the X-Men. Now, you know, saying all these years that one of the greatest forms of human control is to control the sense of the possible. Because if you can compress people's sense of the possible, then while they think this is possible, and actually this is possible, and you're operating in this area here to do the manipulation, as long as the population only think that is possible, then you're going to do what you like here, and no one's going to believe what you're doing or even know what you're doing, and certainly not believe what you're doing, because it's well beyond their sense of the possible. So when people like me come along and say, this is going on, look, oh, he's mad, he's ridiculous, you know, insane and all this stuff. But what's happening now, slowly but surely, is that aspects of mainstream science are uncovering and seeing to be true more and more what so-called nutters and weirdos have been saying for such a long time. And this taking over someone's mind so you can play a computer game through them is a piece of cake, because the brain is a biological computer. In fact, the the whole body is a holographic biological computer. And if you can access that on the wavelength of that computer, then you can hack the system, and you can make the body act and the mind act as you dictate it. Now, oh, by the way, before I go on, that's why they want a global DNA database. Because if they've got your DNA, they've got your unique wavelength of everybody. That's the whole idea. So if we go back to what I was saying about this transmission, both blocking the wider reality that we should be experiencing and aware of, but also feeding us the false reality which we're decoding into this world we think is real, just like a computer decodes the internet. Then you can start to see that if you can hack the system, just like that study experiment has done with the gamer, then you can not only suppress people's ability to see the wider reality, you can dictate the reality they do have, and even dictate body movement. Never mind the key foundation of it all, which is human perception itself, from which everything comes. Get people to perceive something a certain way, everything comes from that. Their behavior, their responses, all of it. That's why my latest book's called The Perception Deception. That's what it is. And so we're now getting more and more confirmation, even through mainstream sources like this one, that what I've been saying all this time is possible. It's, if you like, technically possible to do what I've been saying is going on. And it is going on. And they live and the Matrix together basically portray what's going on. And there's another story this week from Science. Controlling medication with your mind. Thought regulation of genes made possible. Scientists have created the first device which allows people to turn genes in mice on and off at will using only their brainwaves. In humans, the ability to regulate the expression of genes through thoughts alone could open up an entirely new avenue for medicine, so on and so forth. And basically what this experiment found is that by focusing the mind, you can change the nature of genes. And this is an aspect of something else that I've been talking about, which is that if you can broadcast something, be it brainwaves, be it technologically generated, that is on the frequency of, for instance, in this case, the body, which in its prime form is an energetic field. This is just the decoded hologram. Actually, the base form is an information field. If you can change that information field through broadcasting technologically information fields akin to brainwaves here, on the frequency of that field, then you are going to change the field. And as you change the field, you change the projected hologram. Thus, we call this genetic mutation. So, when we've had all these stories in all the cultures about the manipulation by the gods of human genetics, and interbreeding with humans and all that stuff, it didn't have to be, if you like, physical procreation. Through technology, if it's advanced enough, you can mutate a species in the way I've just described. And this could well explain some of these sudden jumps and changes in the human form that have been documented even by mainstream science. So we are in a era now when information coming to light through at least the cutting edge of mainstream is more and more confirming that what I've been saying about the way this reality is and how it works and how it's been hijacked is actually, if you like, technically possible, technologically possible, because they're beginning to understand at last, hallelujah, more about the true nature of reality and the body and how it works and how the mind interacts with so-called matter. And thus they're starting to see that what they dismissed before as absolutely impossible, ridiculous, because they were just seeing physical and solid, is actually very possible, and indeed, more than very possible, very straightforward. I remember using a quote at Wembley by Nikola Tesla, one of the great scientific geniuses of the 20th century, for whom we have to thank for things like radar, because he had it stolen from him by Marconi and won a series of cases in the Supreme Court of the United States proving that and having it accepted. Yet still today, oh no, Marconi, radar, no, Tesla. And we can thank him for the electricity systems we have today. The man was a bloody genius. And he said that when science starts to look at non-physical phenomena, when it starts to look at frequency and vibration and such like, it will make greater strides in a short time than it's taken vast amounts of what we call time to get to this point. The breakthroughs would just be phenomenal. And that's not only in the sense of understanding how we get free energy without use of fossil fuels, without wind turbines and all that stuff, and even solar power. You can access the natural electrical, electromagnetic forces all around us, turn it into usable warmth for power, as he knew, and he did. But it's not only that, but these breakthroughs, at least in mainstream breakthroughs, in understanding more and more about the malleable, energetic nature of reality, they are also opening the door to see what this society really is and what's really behind it. Because these entities hiding behind human form and so brilliantly portrayed in They Live are feeding off human low vibrational energy, emotional energy, fear, anxiety, depression, hatred, all these things, because that's the frequency band that they can absorb, because that's their state of being. But they're hiding behind human form for a reason, that there's not enough of them, and they're not powerful enough compared with human potential to control human society if human society knew what the bloody hell was going on and who was behind it. And so they have to hide behind human form. And in doing so, they hijack the positions of power. And they make decisions in all these different, so talk about, the extreme Muslims and extreme Israelis and the extreme white Americans or British or whatever, in terms of the political decisions that have been made and the military decisions that have been made. grasp that they're all being made by different expressions of the same hidden force, then the pennies start to drop on what's going on in the world. And so what they want, and there's many reasons for this, but what they want is human society at war with itself. Because while human society is at war with itself, the target population is divided and ruled, and they just run the bloody show without almost everybody realizing that they're running the show, or even they exist, never mind running the show. And so when you look at how different peoples are played off against each other, that's being done systematically. And if we're going to bring an end to it, and we are, then this understanding has to be grasped of what the force is manipulating and playing different parts of the human family off against each other. And another thing needs to be realized: the only way to stop it is to stop being manipulated, to stop being told to hate this people, or fight this people, or arm that people, or attack that people. Because all the different expressions of political and economic and military leadership that are saying that are in the end all the same network of non-human entities who are manipulating human society by hiding behind human form. So for that, they live is a real gift, because what it does in little more than an hour and a half, it's not a long film, it gives a brilliant visual representation of what we're dealing with and how the world could be if we rid the world of this force in the shadows. So I really do recommend, if you're not seen They Live, I really recommend it, because it's very enlightening in the way that it portrays the world, because that's the world we actually live in. Well, anyone who studies dictatorships, tyrannies, will know one thing. One of the greatest, indeed the foundation of tyranny, is dividing and ruling the target population. And now look around the world. You've got America divided and ruled over the clashes between Trump supporters and so-called progressives. You have the divide and rule going on in Britain over Brexit, and you have the divide and rule going on across Europe with regard to the scale of immigration. Does anyone think this is all an accident? That it's all happening by chance, by random events? When you do the research, the same characters keep coming up across all of those things and more that are dividing and ruling the global population, and thus allowing the few not just to control, but to continually direct the lives in terms of where the world is going, of billions of people. So today I'm going to talk about Trump, progressives, Zionist billionaires, fake news, and the state of the alternative media. And all those things are part of a coherent whole when you see how the dots connect. Now, Donald Trump, he was elected not because of what he is and not because of what he'll do, but because of a public perception, at least among a great number of Americans, a public perception of what he is and what he will do. And, well, reality is dawning already. He's gone back on prosecuting Hillary Clinton for extraordinary levels of criminal activity and corruption and much more. He's going back on climate change being a hoax. He's condemned the so-called alt-right media that essentially got him elected. And he's going back on his Muslim ban. And he is apparently going to produce an economic package. Sits back in amazement, can't believe it, struggling with the shock. That will benefit the very rich and make them very much richer. He really has only one area left already. I mean, he's not even in office yet, where he can produce what he said he would do. And that is not to appoint heads of defense and Secretary of State from a pool of people apparently being considered that are warmongering, let's go to war with Russia, let's continue business as usual in terms of overseas imposition of American will through military means. We can only hope that he will be, even him, though it must take something, that even him will be too embarrassed to appoint those sort of people to the Defense Department and the State Department after what he has said about improving relations with Russia and not wanting to have the regime change of President Assad in Syria as a non-negotiable must be, which is fundamental to bringing an end to that US-UK NATO members manipulated catastrophe, which is masquerading as a people's revolution in Syria. And interesting that Trump has already spoken out against the so-called alt-right. And you know, will people never learn? What politicians do, and con men and liars, sorry I repeat myself, is they tell their electorate that which they have to get to vote for them, that part of society that will vote for them, never mind the ones that won't. They have to tell that potential support what it wants to hear. And if Trump was going to get elected, he had to get this increasingly vast number of people, massively increasing number of people, who get their information overwhelmingly through what's become known as the alternative media. People who are sick of being lied to by the mainstream, decade after decade after decade. And so what Trump did, he's told them what they wanted to hear. So it was a climate change hoax, it was going for the economic system and sorting out the Federal Reserve and all these things that people in the alternative media want to hear. But now, of course, reality is dawning because he's going back on one after the other. And if he goes back, we hope he won't. We hope he will be too embarrassed to do it. But if he goes back on his pledges for foreign policy and puts war hawks in the key positions, then there is, before he comes to power, there is nothing left, basically, of what he said he would do. And it's a head shaker for me that significant swathes of the so-called alternative media in the United States should be supporting Trump in the belief that he was going to do what they wanted him to do. And of course, all we're seeing is a repeat of what happened with Obama and the other side of this ludicrous political so-called spectrum. He came in, he was going to be the great new political messiah of change and transformation. He wasn't going to be like George Bush before him. He wasn't going to be a warmonger. He was going to be about fairness and justice and all these things. And of course, you would take it as a gimme that the first black president would be good for black people in America. Didn't work out so well, did it? The why is simple. He was just the first black frontman president for a hidden hand cabal that had used, up to this point, white men, frontmen in the White House. So it was business as usual. But there was a difference, you see, and this is very, very significant in this psychological game that is going on, because it's all a mind game. Remember during the Bush administration when he was using the excuse of the completely internally created 9/11 to justify going into Iraq, etc. There was a very strong anti-war movement started to build in the United States. And it was made up of what people are now calling and call themselves progressives. I'll get to that later on. Then Obama comes in, the darling, the messiah of the progressives, and continues business as usual. With what's happened in Libya, for instance, what's happened in Syria, and the extraordinary levels of death and destruction that his policies, in league not least with Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, have visited upon the so deeply tragic Middle East. Where's been the anti-war movement in the Obama years? Where is it? Nowhere. Why? Because when you put your faith in this Messiah president, this Mr. Progressive president, then, a number of things happen. First of all, you can't, or you don't want to admit to yourself you've been had, and thus what you would condemn Bush for, rightly before, you keep your mouth shut in terms of Obama, even though he's doing the same things. And so what we're seeing now is the same, but at the other polarity. We're having the so-called alt-right and those parts of the alternative media that supported Trump already privately, and even some, to be fair, publicly, aghast at the way he's going back on everything. So fast as well, I mean. Anyway, but some are now already defending him for going back on what he said he would do. But why are they defending him? For the same reason that the progressives went quiet and the anti-war movement went quiet once Obama came in, doing the same things that Bush had done. And alt-right. This is this new phrase for the alternative right-wing media as opposed to the mainstream right-wing media. But, you know, I started out doing what I do now basically before there was an alternative media. There was virtually nothing there. The odd radio station here and there. And you had to get this information out through books or by tramping around from place to place, talking to next to nobody, because nobody was really interested in those days. It wasn't an alternative media. And it's worth, and I think it's important now, for the alternative media, or calls itself that, to actually take a breath in the light of current events and just reevaluate what it's there for and why it came into existence in the first place. Because if you identify with a political position, whether it's right or left, whether it's Republican or Democrat, whether it's Labour or Conservative, or any other these political polarities anywhere in the world, then from where I'm sitting, you are not part of the alternative media. You are just mainstream light, if that in some cases now. The alternative media came into existence originally to point out that the whole right, centre, left political paradigm is a gigantic hoax. It's a hoax because in the shadows, all these different apparently alternative political persuasions are actually masks on the same face of a force in the shadows. And that's why, whether it's a left government or a right government, essentially the same things happen and the world goes in the same direction. It was to point out that the system is rigged and you will never change anything through the political system, because the political system is actually there and structured to stop anything changing for the better of the people, to stop anything changing that stops this incessant direction of the world to global fascism from continuing. So there is no such thing as an alt-right, an alternative media that calls itself right. Just as there's no such thing as a alternative media that calls itself left or centre or progressive or any of it. Because these are all tags and names and labels for basically the same thing in terms of ultimately what's controlling them. And so the alternative media needs to look at itself. The genuine alternative media that is exposing the way things work rather than taking political positions within the structure of the way things work. And it needs to make sure that it doesn't get pulled into this political nonsense that significant parts of the alternative media have been pulled into. Then there's this thing coming up now more and more and more in the last few days since the Trump election, and it's called fake news. Well, the ironies are not lost. This is the idea that Trump got elected because of fake news from alternative sources on the internet, social media, and all this stuff. The irony, there are many, but one of the major ones is that the mainstream media is pushing this about fake news, as are the politicians, of course. If you want the home of fake news, decade after decade after decade, then just go to the alternative media. The mainstream media. Although the alternative is involved in fake news as well, as I'll come to in parts of it. If you look at even the leaked emails in terms of Clinton and the way the media was working with her to her benefit and to manipulate the perceptions of the population, for that same media now to come out and start saying we must, in effect, start censoring the internet because of fake news, it's extraordinary. But of course, the genuine alternative media has and continues to make a fantastic contribution to the circulation of information and exposure of the system and that which serves the system in all its forms, which is making an impact upon the political system and on people's awareness of the world as it really is. And so, of course, they want to label things in a way that targets the alternative media. So it's all fake news. No, it's not. Actually, it's the best journalism on planet Earth comes from the alternative media. However, as I said, with a little, what do they call them, Freudian slips, when I said alternative instead of mainstream, that actually was very relevant, because it's no good either, the alternative media sticking its nose in the air and looking down on the mainstream, and then having very significant swathes of it operating and acting in the same way the mainstream does. Let's not fall into this black and white trap that the mainstream media is fake news, but the alternative media, all of it, no, it's the truth. No, it's not. There's a load of old bollocks comes out through what calls itself the alternative media. We have websites, many websites that call themselves alternative media platforms that blatantly put out fake news that they've made up. You have a situation where they put out a headline designed to make you click on it so that you'll add to their advertising revenue. And when you go to the text, having now added to their advertising, the text in absolutely no way justifies the headline. It's called clickbait. That's alternative. There's one website, actually, again, ironically, run by a former webmaster of davidicke.com some time ago, that not only operates with the clickbait technique, but actually uses a named writer that doesn't actually exist. And they call themselves alternative. Now, if you want to discredit the genuine alternative media that's making and has made such a fantastic contribution to the population's awareness of what's happening and it's not being told about, then all you do is you pick out the fake news people. You pick out the clickbaiters. You pick out people who are using fake writers. And you say that's the alternative media. It's not. But that's the way propaganda works. So it's important that the genuine alternative media doesn't sit around and just let this go unchallenged, but constantly highlights to people where these clickbait sites are, where these fake news sites are. and the alternative media cleans up its own house. And please, those that have supported Trump in the alternative media and taken a political position, please sit down, take a deep breath, and have another look at it. It's about the system, exposing the rigged system, which means it doesn't really matter who comes in terms of front people, because the system's in control, whoever's there. That's what we were created to expose. Now, progressives. Progressives. These are people. It's a word used in America. It's being used in Britain and more widely now. Progressives are those. You can pretty much recognize them because they have big hearts all the way down their arm, on their sleeve. Oh, I'm so kind and I'm so good. Look at me. Look at what I'm doing. I'm such a kind, loving person. Right. Let's see. One of the words that is put together with progressive, almost like they're interchangeable terms, is liberal. In fact, in America, it's conservative or it's liberal. It's Republican or Democrat. So this word liberal is thrown around all the time. In fact, it's thrown around very liberally. So, 3 definitions. Liberal. Favouring reform, open to new ideas, and tolerant of the ideas and behaviour of others, not bound by traditional thinking, broad-minded. Well, I mean, that's pretty much the direction I'm coming from. If you want to use the dictionary definition. Now, progressive, which is supposed to be liberal, but isn't. Much of it, anyway. Progressive. Favouring or advocating progress. But who decides what's progress? Change. Improvement. Who decides what's improvement? And reform, as opposed to wishing to maintain things as they are, especially in political matters. Well, there's nothing in that definition that you could call liberal. It's just wanting change, etc. Now, this is interesting. This is the definition of fascism. A tendency toward or actual exercise of strong autocratic or dictatorial control. Now, when I look at the behaviour of so many people that call themselves progressives, it's that last definition that I see. We have people, well, it's obviously much of it has been generated and coordinated out of the shadows, but we've had these protests against Trump that he shouldn't be president, that things should happen to stop that happening. We've had violence on the streets. These people call themselves progressives. Yet if Clinton had have won in the same way that Trump did, that would have been to these same people. The people have spoken. It's democracy. Instead, we've had these progressives holding up love Trump's hate banners with fury and hatred on their faces. I mean, anyone got a mirror? Might be helpful. These people are so self-deluded. They don't see that their behaviour mirrors that which they claim to oppose. And so we're having these protests, and then we're having Clinton supporters, progressives, crying and in need of therapy and stuff because a woman who so believes in the rights of women that she takes millions from the royal family of Saudi Arabia, which you may have noticed has a problem with women's rights, but someone who is one of the most deeply, deeply corrupt people ever to appear in American politics, and my God, think of the competition, has not won the presidency of the United States. Ah, therapy. Instead of looking at what is wrong and what is behind a system called democracy and politics that offers you a disaster or a catastrophe in terms of Clinton or Trump. And look at some of the people, one of the major people that fund these progressive organizations. George Soros, Zionist oligarch billionaire. Who was someone that put tens of millions into the Vote for Trump campaign? Sheldon Adelson, Zionist oligarch billionaire. Does anyone really think, in their terminal naivety, that those two people don't ultimately answer to the same masters? So why would you have massive funding of progressive movements and massive funding supporting someone the progressives demonize, Trump, for president? We come back to where we started. Divide and rule. George Soros and his Open Society foundations and all the networks that go out from them was majorly involved in triggering the Arab Spring, which was presented by the fake news media as a spontaneous people's revolution in the Arab world. It was just a front to allow Western, not least American and British, funded, armed, trained rebels, mercenaries, to start a proxy war by America and the UK and other NATO countries against targets in the Middle East like Gaddafi and Assad. But they said, oh no, it's a people's revolution. It's just a front for a proxy war. Because if you keep invading countries over and over again, openly, like in Iraq, then people are going to go, what's going on? So you sell it as a people's revolution. And quite a few months ago now, there was something in Washington, D.C. called Democracy Spring, where progressives went to Washington to protest about billionaires and their influence in politics, as if their poster boy, Barack Obama, wasn't funded massively to record-breaking degrees at the time by the same people. And another irony, a number of the organizations that took part in Democracy Spring are funded by George Soros, a Zionist oligarch billionaire who does springs rather well, it seems. What you have is people of a certain persuasion, say the right. They get their information from the right-wing press and what's become known as the alt-right. And then you get people of a progressive persuasion, and they get their information from the left-wing press or the so-called liberal press, the progressive press. And just as in politics and political parties, left, right, centre, whoops, controlled by the same people, so are the left-wing press and so are the right-wing press. They're just different masks, once again, on the same face. So all these groups within politics, whether it's the right or progressives or centre, they're all getting their information about the world basically from the same sources. And the only literal alternative to that is going to the genuine alternative media that's dismantling the system in people's minds by exposing what it is and not taking a left-right position within the system of control. And that's why they're targeting the genuine alternative media now through these fake news, anything but alternative websites, and through those who've taken a political position in the Trump election. And there's something that's a term that's come to be used more and more now. It's called identity politics. And it's time for all persuasions in the political spectrum and those in the alternative media that are not, in my view, very alternative, to grow up and to stop playing this identity political game that's allowing the few to dictate to the many, incessantly, ongoing. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. I'm gay, okay, I'm gay, not me, but I'm talking about this gay identity. There's lots of gay people who are not like this, but there is a gay mentality that looks at politics from a gay perspective. What about gays? Because their identity is that they're gay. Then you have transgender identity politics, which is all under this progressive wing. And then you have Jewish, Muslim, Christian identity politics, which says I'm this is my label, so I'm going to vote from a position that best suits my identity. It's the politics of me. Identity politics. First of all, that is a godsend to anyone who wants to divide and rule. But it also means that simple things like what is fair, what is just, what is right by all people just go missing. Questions like that. What is the fair thing to do here? Not what is the best thing to do for my identity and my identity politics. What is the fair thing to do here in this situation? What is the just thing to do in this situation? And there's another part of this identity politics, which is money. What's the fair thing to do? What's the just thing to do in terms of the financial system? It's that no one is without a home, no one is hungry, and no one is allowed to fall below a certain basic level of life. But what does identity politics do in terms of the finance? It says, which one will make me more money than I already have, and I have more than I could spend in 100 lifetimes? All this identity stuff, all this me, what's in it for me, what will they do for me, has made us lose perspective of those simple things, those simple foundations of making judgments and introducing changes. What is fair? what is just for all people concerned. And, you know, when I talk about progressives of the left, there are still some genuine people there that do come from that perspective and do value things like freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Because when we come back to this definition of fascism, liberal and progressive, but particularly when we come back to this definition of fascism, that's what political correctness is. It's the arrogant belief that you can dictate what people can say, even eventually what they can think, because you're right, and therefore anyone who has a different opinion must be wrong. There's no such thing as a different opinion to a progressive of this extreme nature, because they're right. Therefore, you've got a different opinion, you must be wrong, and because you've got a different opinion and you're wrong, what value is there in allowing you to speak? It's fascism. It's manipulation of the population, the target population, to silence itself, so those manipulating the target population don't have to. And the great drivers of this politically correct fascism, this destruction and deletion of basic freedom of thought, freedom of speech and expression, the so-called progressives. Oh, I'm so kind, look at me. All it is George Orwell's 1984 Newspeak. All those decades ago, he predicted this. And here's the progressives who are actually behind it. They're behind the hoax of global warming. So no one can have another view exposing that, otherwise they have to be silenced. And you know, progressives of this kind, and my God, they're growing. Do you know who put Trump in power? You did. You know who won the Brexit vote that you didn't want to go the way it did? You did. Do you know what's driving people into parties that are against immigration in Europe of the scale that's happening? You are. And I'll tell you why. Because you are the new establishment, the new authority, you have made it impossible, increasingly impossible anyway, not quite, try it with me, disgusting, despicable, but in some ways a positive thing, because it is showing people in their face that the financial and political class couldn't give a damn about what they want. Because this country, like every other country, is not run for the people. It's run for the political and financial classes, and like I keep saying, the hidden hand networks that work through those classes. So we're asked to believe by this Gina Miller, who is a city fund manager and married to a city slicker who's even got a well-known nickname in the city as Mr. Hedge Fund. And they apparently run an investment operation, which according to reports has portfolios worth around £100 million. So they're regular people, just like the rest of us. And she asks us to believe that this legal challenge to the government's right to trigger Brexit without a parliamentary vote is about process. It's not about politics. It's about politics, Gina, isn't it? And you know it. Here we have a lady who says that she was so horrified by the Brexit vote that it made her, quote, physically sick. So here we're being asked to believe that someone so vehemently in favour of staying in the EU has simply thrown this spanner in the works of the Brexit process, simply because she believes in parliamentary democracy and she wants to protect it. That, Gina, would be the parliamentary democracy that your fantastic, what could be wrong with it, EU has spent the last more than 40 years destroying, with more and more laws being made by dark suit bureaucrats outside of this country, never mind outside of Parliament. This is the EU that is a bureaucratic tyranny, taking away and deleting year on year on year the right of sovereign parliaments to make decisions about what happens in their country. But you, a supporter of the European Union in the extreme, and all that, I've only done this to throw the Brexit process into turmoil because you believe in parliamentary democracy. They really do think we're all frickin' idiots. But as they found in the referendum, we ain't. This is a quote from Gina Miller, who was only doing it to protect the process. I felt physically sick, she said, when the referendum result came through, because I thought, I don't think people know the ramifications of this, of what's happened, and I felt really sorry that people had been tricked and fooled. You see, the financial and political classes, they know best, you see. So if you are just an ordinary person, just one of the great unwashed, then you really don't know anything about anything. You haven't worked out that Britain has lost control of its own country to the European Union. You haven't worked out all the European laws and regulations that are dictating, like I say, the fine detail of your life and what you can do and can't do. You haven't worked out that smaller companies are being crushed by the weight of EU regulation that's destroying their ability to function. You can't work that out. You have to leave it to those who know best, the city financiers and the politicians. You're just the man in the street, the woman in the street. What do you know? She goes on. We must not underestimate or forget the anger in Europe. Ooh, really, I'm terrified. About our vote. They're very angry that we've had this relationship, yet we still threaten the union. Well, they should be angry then. Actually, there's a vast number of people in other European countries that want to do the same that Britain did and vote to come out. They're not being given the chance because the political class that knows best is terrified that they might do the same. It's extraordinary. Now, let's have a look at these other people who were behind this legal challenge, in which judges decided that it had to go to Parliament for a vote before Article 50 could be triggered and could not just be done by the government carrying out the will of the people. The organisation behind this, or one of them, is called People's Challenge. Who are these people? It was set up in the summer by a guy called Graham Pigney, a British expatriate. He now lives in France. And Paul Cartwright, who is a Gibraltar national and works as an environmental officer for the Gibraltar government. Was Gibraltar in England or Scotland or Wales, Northern Ireland, the last time you lied? I don't believe it was. Mr. Pigney, originally from Fareham in Hampshire, is a semi-retired man and has lived in a wine-growing region of Carcassonne for 19 years. So one of the people behind this doesn't even live in the country and has lived in France for 19 years. And he wants to, in effect, let's be very open and sensible about it. He wants to block Brexit. That's what this is really all about. No, it's the process. Anyway, also backing this legal action that won this ruling this week is an organisation called Fair Deal for Expats Group. Well, expats. So they don't live in England either, or Britain. No. It includes among them dozens of Britons living abroad. Oh, anyone notice a theme here? And these include a British company director who lives in France, seems to be a popular place, a businessman who runs holiday rentals in Italy, and an English language teacher in Hamburg, Germany. I never saw Britain get a mention there. Mr. Pigney defended his decision to launch People's Challenge. He said, I happen to live in France, but that is inconsequential in the context of the constitutional crisis we are facing. The constitutional crisis that your challenge has just massively added to, by the way. And it's not inconsequential. He says here, what's at stake is nothing less than parliamentary sovereignty. We need to make sure we do not hand the sovereignty of the UK to a self-appointed government. Well, what do you mean the sovereignty that's being handed to in effect, self-appointed bureaucrats for the last 40-odd years? And of course, it's not inconsequential that someone who starts a legal challenge affecting the vote of 17.4 million people actually has lived in another country for 19 years. Another guy in this group is a Brazilian-born hairdresser who no one seems to know much about. And that is the organisation with their 12 barristers, obviously money no object there, who have created a situation where the anti-EU majority, or the anti-leave the EU majority in Parliament, now potentially, unless this government appeal is successful, now have enormous control over the Brexit process, how fast it moves, the nature of what it is, etc. And that's the whole point of what has happened here. And the judgment was made by 3 judges, including one, the Lord Chief Justice, who actually is a co-founder of an organisation dedicated to integrating laws all over Europe into one EU group of laws that are basically all the same. In other words, centralising control in Europe via the legal system. And, you know, in the last 24 hours, day or two, since this judgment was made, we have seen so many extraordinarily ludicrous things said, like it's just about the process, not politics. And another one is, I saw that the judgment was made by an independent judiciary, acting above politics and outside politics. you know, the greatest threat to humankind. It's frickin' naivety. The idea that the judiciary is above politics and the judiciary is independent is absolutely ludicrous. Like I say, what it's really about is blocking Brexit, or watering it down to the point where it ain't Brexit at all. And that's beyond all the bullshit. That's exactly what this is about. And it's sickening to me, anyway, to see this group who call themselves progressives, word that came out of America, basically those of the left and Greens and all these people call themselves liberals, to see them lining up alongside and cheering when they came out of the High Court, the city millionaires, and lining up alongside the financial and political class in demanding, in effect, that the will of the people is not adhered to and we stay in the EU. Here we have these so-called, because that's what they are, so-called progressives, who will go on marches and protest against the extremes of the financial class and the political class that they don't agree with, or that part of the political class they don't agree with, while they now stand alongside of them to defend democracy by destroying it. They stand alongside people like Tony Blair, a man who so loves parliamentary democracy that he lied to Parliament to justify a catastrophic war that has cost the lives of millions of people, both in Iraq and as a result of what that invasion of Iraq has done since in terms of the Middle East. A man who didn't even keep his own cabinet informed of what was going on in relation to the invasion of Iraq. These progressives, the British equivalent of the bullshitter in the United States, a classic fake progressive Michael Moore, are now standing shoulder to shoulder with people like Tony Blair. It is absolutely pathetic. And we're seeing, we are in a point now where things are coming to the surface where we can't ignore them anymore. This is why you've got that quote from the Daily Mail using the word conspiracy of the political class against the people. It's becoming blatant. Look at the Clinton emails, how they've shown the collusion with the media, how they collude to block the candidates like Bernie Sanders that they don't want. How behind the scenes they're saying exactly the opposite to what they're saying in public. And how the whole system is so deeply, shockingly, unspeakably corrupt. And now we're having this put in our face again in Britain. The political class and that which was behind the political class, which, like I say, most of the political class doesn't even know that hidden hand exists, while it does its bidding, just like the progressives. Global warming, political correctness, stay in the EU. These are all desires of the hidden hand, which the progressives play out, thinking they're being progressive. It's hilarious, if you want, it's tragic. We've reached the point now where we, the people, have got to say enough. We've got to stop cooperating with this system of corrupt, mendacious control and stop handing our power to it. They have the power to dictate our lives because we give that power to them. How can their number dictate to millions of people, globally billions of people? They can't unless those millions and billions give their power away to them. We've got to stop it because it's becoming more blatant and therefore more obvious because it's becoming more extreme. And the naivety of people, like I say, is extraordinary, as we're seeing this week. I saw this post. It's just an example of endless ones on social media just after this judgment was made, from a guy called Martin Cuff, whoever he is. One day we'll thank Gina Miller for saving the entire notion of British parliamentary democracy, he says. The British parliamentary democracy and sovereignty that has been systematically destroyed by the EU, which this lady clearly is desperate for us to stay in. And just before this vote, I read this story. It's about a guy called David Attenborough, famous filmmaker on nature. And he's part of the BBC establishment, which is very pro-EU, which is part of the political establishment, the financial establishment. They're just dumb masks on the same face. And this is what the story said. David Attenborough risked enraging millions by claiming the public is not wise enough to have been given a say on Brexit. Note that theme. The public is not wise enough. We're the political classes. Only we know what's best. Could have been Gina Miller. The TV naturalist said the vote from 17.4 million British citizens to leave the EU had created a mess. Actually, it wasn't. But it's more of one now, thanks to the political class. And argued that the decision should have been left to MPs to vote on our behalf. Oh, David. I must send him the link to Naivety Anonymous. These were the people that voted to have a war in Iraq. These are the people that have made catastrophic decisions in relation to giving power away to the EU, that have made catastrophic decisions right across the board that have damaged life in Britain. Critics accuse the 90-year-old of being elitist. No, never, surely. And failing to recognise what the people want. But that doesn't matter. You're the great unwashed. You just do what we say. Pat you on the head when you agree with us. Smack you on the head when you don't. Referring to Donald Trump's rise in the US, Sir David said, "There's confusion, isn't there?" Well, I suspect that David Attenborough is rather often confused myself. There's confusion, isn't there, between populism and parliamentary democracy. I mean, that's why we're in the mess we are with Brexit, is it not? No. Do we really want to live by this kind of referendum? When it's fundamental to people's lives, yes. And he added, what we mean by parliamentary democracy is surely that we find someone we respect. Well, that's going to be bloody hard when it comes to MPs, isn't it? That we find someone that we respect, that we think is probably wiser than we are. Well, that's even more difficult. What's the man talking about? But this is the mindset of the political, financial, and media establishment. We think is probably wiser than we are, who is prepared to take the responsibility of pondering difficult things and then trust him or her to vote on our behalf. And a few people can't control the world. It's a piece of cake.